A while back, let's see. Yeah, I think that's A while back, I saw this code pin and wanted to see if I could rebuild it. If you're new to the Self Teach Me channel, my name is Amy Dutton. I'm a web designer and developer. If you're just getting into this space, sometimes it's hard to know where to start or what resources to trust. I want to help you level up and get to where you want to be. If this sounds interesting to you, hit the subscribe button below. Let's start by getting our project set up. I'm going to use Create React App because React makes it easy to manage state, and Create React App simplifies the process of getting up and running with React. If you're not familiar with React, don't worry, most of the work that we're going to be doing will be within CSS. I'm going to head over to the terminal and navigate to my projects directory. Then I'm going to use Create React App to set things up. So I'm going to say npx create react app, animated password. And here, animated password is the name of my project and the name of the folder that it's going to create. It's going to take a minute. Once the application is created, your terminal should look like this. It gives us several commands that we can run. cd animated password yarn start. So let's navigate to our animated password directory. And then I'm going to use yarn start to get our project up and running within the browser. Okay, once it's up, your terminal should tell you you're up and running successfully. And then it will also launch a browser with your project pulled up, or you can go to this address. Let's open up our project's code within VS Code and get going. Let's look at what the script set up. So a quick look at the sidebar reveals all the files that were generated. So if we expand the source directory, this is where we'll spend most of our time, and we can clean a lot of this up starting at the top. So app.css contains all the styling for our app.js file. Let's just delete all the contents here. Okay, give that a save. App.js is our application. So here at the top, we can delete the React logo. We can also delete everything inside our div with a class name of app. Give that a save. Okay, then our app.test.js file is a starter test file. And since we're going to be changing all the contents for our app.js file, this dummy test will fail. So for right now, I'm just going to delete this file altogether. Our index.css file contains the global CSS that's applied to all of our components. And if you open it up and take a look, it's defining some global fonts. You could keep it or delete it. It really doesn't matter. For right now, I'm going to keep it just so my base fonts look okay. Plus, I like having a margin of 0 on the body. Close that. Index.js is what loads everything in. I'm not going to touch this. Logo.svg we can delete. And I'm not going to touch the service worker or our setup test.js. We don't need these files, but they're good just to keep around. First things first, let's write out the functionality for our component. I'm going to create a folder called components inside our source directory, and then I'm going to create a file called password.js. And within our new file, I'm going to type RAFCE and hit tab. I have an extension running inside VS Code called ES7 React Redux GraphQL React Native Snippets. I'll include a link in the description below, but this expands my snippet into a functional React component. Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna do is turn this into a named export. It's pretty simple. I just get rid of the word default and wrap password with curly brackets. I always use named exports. This makes things so much easier for consistency. You never have to worry about whether the export is a named export or a default export when it's always a named export. So let's create our field. I'm gonna say input, type password, and give this a name of password. To get our component to display within our application, we need to import it inside app.js. At the top, I'm gonna say import password from components password. Then within our return statement, I'm going to say password to display our component. Then when a user hits a toggle button, it will display the password as text, meaning we'll need state to track the view the user sees. If state is a new concept for you, you can think of it like a variable that tracks the view or the state of the component. In our case, we're tracking whether the user can see a password or a text field. This will be a Boolean. A Boolean is a true or false value that works like a switch. So, okay, is the password showing? Yes. True is the password showing. No, false. So at the top of our file, let's import use state from React. If you've never used state before, hopefully this doesn't get too confusing, but bear with me. You got this. Okay, first, above our return statement, we're gonna call use state. Next, we can pass use state a default value. So we're gonna pass it false. By default, we don't want our password to show. Use state returns a pair of values, the current state and a function to update the state. So we want to save these values so we can reference them later. So I'm going to say const is password showing and set is password showing. Is password showing is the current state. This is the name of the variable. We could say console.log is password showing, and it will return true or false depending on the current state. Set is password showing is the function that updates our state. So notice our function name is very similar to our state. The only difference is it has the word set in front of it. This is on purpose. This is a React naming convention. If the syntax looks confusing to you with the square brackets, it's actually a JavaScript thing. It's called destructuring an array. Normally, when we're referencing values inside of an array, we'll use square brackets, like 0 for the first item and 1 for the second item. And let's be honest, nobody wants to deal with that. It's cumbersome and hard to read. So by destructuring, we can assign the first value returned to is password showing and the second value to set is password showing. We give these values a name and make it much easier to reference. Now let's use our state. Let's wrap our password field with a conditional. And conditionals within React are a little strange, or rather conditionals within JSX are a little strange. You can't just inject an if-else block. You have to do everything in line. So let's say is password showing. And if it is, we want to display a text field. The name of password. Otherwise, we want to display our password field. Just to summarize, if is password showing is true, then it'll show the text field. Otherwise, we have a colon, we are showing the password field. So if we look at this within the browser, we will see our password field. And we will always see our password field. So if you type inside, you should see the dots instead of actual text. In fact, we will never see the text field. Why? Well, because up here within our code, we initialized use state to false. If we set this to true, then if we come back over to the browser, we'll see our text field. I'm gonna undo that. Now let's set up our toggle button. This sits outside of the conditional because we always want it to be displayed. So I'm gonna say button toggle. So for now, we'll make this really simple and we can style it later. If you look at this within the browser, you will see the toggle button right next to our field. And if we click on this button, nothing happens. Let's add some functionality. On the button tag, let's add an on-click event handler. Then we can specify a JavaScript function that will run when the button is clicked. We'll use curly brackets to say this is JavaScript, and we'll name our function toggle password. And this is just a name that I made up. It could be anything. Okay, now we actually need to write the function that will run when the button is clicked. So above our return statement, I'm gonna say const toggle password. And this is where we can use our is password showing state that we created earlier. So just like a switch, we want it to flip back and forth between true and false every time the button is clicked. We'll say set is password showing to update our state. And all we need to do is pass the new value that we want to update it to. And we want it to be the opposite, so exclamation point, of the current state is password showing. Okay, let's look at this within our browser. I'm gonna type some text here, and if we toggle that, we see our text and then we see the password. Perfect. Surprisingly, that's all our functionality our input field needs. Of course, if this was used in a real application, you need to write code for handling the form field, but for our demo, the bulk of the remaining work will be handled within styles. Open app.css. This is where all the fanciness and the magic is going to happen. So let's start by creating CSS variables for all of our colors, and this will just make it easier to reference our colors throughout our code. The cool part about CSS variables is that they're scoped. So in our case, we want these to live on root. And then to create a variable, we use double dashes, whatever name you want, followed by a colon, and then the value. Be sure to include a semicolon at the end of the line. Okay, we're gonna define 4 different colors. A teal called robin egg blue, a dark purple called bunting, white, and a light gray. When it comes to referencing our variables, we'll simply use var and pass it the name of the variable we want to use. So for example, robin egg blue. First, let's move our password field to the center of the page. And if you look at app.js, you'll see there's a div with a class of app that wraps everything. Let's target that. So within app.css, we'll say app. Okay, let's make it fill the entire screen. So width 100 VW, height 100 VH. And if you've never seen VW and VH, it's short for viewport width and height. Then the easiest way to center this is to change the display to flex. And we can center it vertically with align items center, and horizontally with justify content center. Let's give our app a background color of light gray. So this is where we're going to use our variables from above. Okay, let's save that and look at it in the browser. Perfect. So let's add our icons. We want a lock icon at the beginning so it looks like a password, and an eyeball at the end to toggle visibility. Let's jump over to Figma and design these icons. That's right, we're gonna do a little bit of design work. Currently, Figma is my go-to app for designing websites and web applications. The best part is you can start using it for free, and with their free plan, you can have up to 3 projects and 2 editors. The first thing I'm gonna do is create a new file by clicking on the plus icon in the upper right. Let's make the lock icon first. This one is probably the easiest. I'm going to hit the R key to draw a rectangle, or you could click on the rectangle icon in the menu bar. I'm going to click and drag to create a rectangle. Then I want to change the color to black, and I want this to have rounded corners. Then I'm going to hit the R key again to draw a second rectangle, and this one is going to be the latch, and I want it just inside this rounded corner. Okay, and I want the corners on this rectangle to be even more round. So same as before, except this time I'm going to set the corners to 35. We can bring this down a little bit. Okay, let's make sure both of these items are perfectly centered. So with both of them selected, I'm going to click on the Align Center button. So for the latch, let's get rid of the fill and give it a stroke. I'm going to make sure that the latch rectangle is the only rectangle selected, and then I'm going to click on the minus button in the fill section. Then I'm going to click on the plus button in the stroke section. Okay, I want the stroke to be black, which it already is, and give this a width of 10 pixels. Make this a little bit smaller. Okay, great. Sweet, it's coming together. There's only one more thing I want to do to our lock. I want to make sure that this is all one shape. It'll make it a little bit easier to change the color if it's one object and we're only manipulating the fill. With the latch selected, go to the main menu, and then go down to Object and Outline Stroke. Here, you can see that it's no longer a stroke, but a fill. So a quick tip here, I'm going to hit undo, is that a lot of times I have trouble remembering exactly where that item is. There's a search box here at the top, and so I'll just type outline stroke and it will appear. Okay, now with both of our shapes selected, we can merge them together by clicking on Union Selection. Okay, the nice thing about Figma is that even after we've merged our shapes together, we can still edit the shapes individually. I can command click on an individual shape, and you can see within the layers panel that it selected that particular shape. And then of course I can also just expand and collapse this union layer here and select an individual shape. And then with that selected, I can manipulate it. Okay, onto the eyeball. I'm gonna hit O to draw an oval. You can also click on the down arrow here where we had rectangle and select ellipse. I'm gonna draw an oval roughly the same size as the lock, except leaving a little room at the top for eyelashes. Similar to before, I'm gonna remove the fill and add a stroke of 10 pixels. And I wanna change the placement of the stroke. Right now it's on the inside. The blue line is the shape and the stroke is inside that. So I can click on this drop down where it says inside, and now I wanna say center. Okay, I also wanna make sure that our edges and corners are rounded. So I'm gonna click on these 3 dots and select rounded on the join option, and under cap, I'm gonna select round as well. Now with the oval still selected, I'm gonna hit enter. And this will allow you to edit each of the points on the circle individually. We want the points on the left and the right to be pointy. So I'm gonna select one of these points. It should turn blue once it's selected. And then I'm gonna select the bend tool in the toolbar. And then I can option click on the point and you'll see my cursor changes. I'm gonna do the same for the point on the left. Option click. And I'm gonna hit enter to exit that mode, and I can resize it slightly. Okay, to animate this, we need to be able to select the top and the bottom lids separately. So I'm gonna duplicate our eyeball by hitting Command D, and then I'm gonna hide one of these instances within the layers panel. The visible ellipse that's selected, I'm gonna hit Command R, so over here, and rename the layer to top lid. Okay, and with this layer selected, I'm going to hit the enter key to edit the points. I'm gonna select the bottom point and just hit delete. Now I'm gonna turn the visibility off for the top lid and show the other ellipse. And we're gonna go through similar steps here. So I'm gonna hit Command R to rename our ellipse to bottom lid. Then I'm gonna hit enter to edit our individual points. I'm gonna select the top point here and hit delete. And now I'm going to turn on the visibility of both of the layers. We need a pupil in our eyelashes, and hit the O key again to draw an oval inside our eyelids. And I want that to be black. Okay, for our eyelashes, I'm gonna hit the L key to go to the line tool. So you can click on the down arrow up here and select the line tool. Same place where we got our rectangle and our ellipse tool. I'm gonna draw one line above our eyeball and hold down the shift key to make sure that it's perfectly vertical. I'm gonna change the stroke to 10 pixels. We wanna make sure that our caps are rounded and our join is rounded. And it looks like we can adjust this just a little bit. Okay, done. Okay, I wanna make sure that our lashes are all the same length. So I'm gonna duplicate this 2 times by hitting Command D twice, and then I'm gonna click and drag our new eyelashes to the correct spot. So if I move my mouse to the end of this line, you should see it change to a curved arrow. And I'm gonna click and drag to rotate. And I recommend holding down the shift key, and that way it will snap at specific increments. Let's tighten everything up and just make sure that it's pixel perfect. I'm gonna select all 3 of our eyelashes and then come up here and select distribute horizontal spacing. Now I'm gonna hit Command G to group all the eyelashes together. And then with the entire eyeball selected, I'm gonna say align horizontal centers. Okay, now I'm gonna hit Command G to group our entire eyeball together. Then I can select both of these icons and come over here to the right and click on the plus button in the export section, and I want both of these to be an SVG. Say export, and we can just save it to our desktop. An SVG is a vector file, so you can think of it like an Illustrator file for the web. It's all based on numbers and math. And the cool part is that the exported file is really just text, so we can override that and manipulate it within our code. I'm going to create a new file within our components directory called lock.js, and I'm going to use my RAFCE React snippet to stub out a functional component. And just like before, I'm going to turn this into a named export. I'm going to open up our lock.svg code. I'm going to copy all of my lock SVG code and paste it inside our components return statement. If you saw it automatically reformat, it's because I'm running an extension called Prettier within VS Code. I'll include a link to that in the description below. I'm going to do a few things to tighten up our file and make it more usable. On the SVG tag, I'm going to add a class name of lock. On the path tag, I'm going to change fill-rule to fill rule and clip rule. These need to be camel cased. I'm going to remove any instances to fill on both our SVG and our path tags. This serves as an inline style, and we want to be able to control it through our CSS. Then with our password.js file, let's import our icon here at the top. Then right before our conditional, we want to include it. So if you go over to the browser, you should see something like this. Okay, great. Now we want to do something similar for our eyeball. Let's create a new file within our components directory called eyeball.js and stub out our functional component and convert our component to a named export. Probably seeing a pattern here. Then we want to open up our iSVG within VS Code, and I'm going to copy all the contents and paste it inside our eyeball.js. Okay, this file is a little longer since there are more paths, but remember, that's the trick here. Each element of the eyeball, the upper lid, lower lid, eyelashes, and pupil, they all have to be a separate path so we can target and animate them individually. Ultimately, we'll group the upper lid and the eyelashes together, and then we can scale them down to make it look like the eyeball is blinking. So if we look in Figma, I can kind of give you a quick visual. So if we grab the eyelashes and the upper lid and we group those together, when we scale this down, this gives the illusion that the eyeball is blinking. This will look even more realistic when we speed up the animation and show and hide the pupil. We'll process our SVG the same way we processed our lock. At the top, we want to add a class name of eyeball, and any attributes with a dash in them need to be converted to camel case attributes. And find and replace makes this pretty easy. So I'm going to say copy, find. I'm going to replace all those. Stroke line cap. Replace all those. Stroke line join. Place all those. Okay. Perfect. Now comes the tedious part. We need to figure out which part each path refers to. The easiest way that I found to do this is to give each path a different color, and then we can add a class name to each path labeling it. This is actually pretty easy. When you want to change the color of a path in an SVG, you'll modify either the fill or the stroke attribute. So let's go through the file, and we're going to look for every reference to black and replace those values. So, okay, so here we can say red, green, purple, blue, orange, brown. I give that a save. Let's add it to our password component. So in password.js, I'm going to import this at the top. And inside our button tag, let's replace the word toggle with our actual eyeball. Give that a save. And let's open this within our browser. Now it becomes pretty easy to find and label all the pieces. So brown is our left lash. I'm going to go back to our eyeball.js, and I'm going to change brown to our teal hex value and add a class name of lash left. Since our eyeball will be the same color throughout the animation, I'm going to hard code this value in. But if we wanted to make our component more reusable, you could remove the stroke and fill properties altogether and just control those values within our CSS. Now it's just a matter of rinse and repeat. Our middle lash is blue. So So we'll do the same thing here. Our right lash is orange. Our top lid is red. Our bottom lid is green. And our pupil is purple. Next, we want to group the top lid and all 3 eyelashes together. Easy peasy. We just need to wrap everything with a G tag. So we have our middle lash, our right lash, and our left lash. So I'm going to group these together, and we just want to move our top lid into our group. I'm also going to put a class name of eyelid on our G tag to make it easier to style and animate later. Okay, we're going to create a faux box for our input. We want it to look like our icons are part of the field, even though they're really not. Don't worry, this is gonna be easier than it sounds. So we're gonna wrap our password field with a div that has a class name of faux box. So within password.js, we already have this div. So I'm just gonna give it a class name of faux box. And within our styles, we can go ahead and give this a background color of robin egg blue. We also want this to have rounded corners, say border radius 10 pixels. We can give it some padding, say 20 pixels. And we want to align all the items within our faux box vertically. And the easiest way to do this is with a flex box. So we can say display flex and align items center. Look at this within our browser. This is what we're looking at. We need to do a few more things to tighten up the styles, and then we can focus on animating it. Let's limit the size of our lock. So within our styles, we can say lock, height 40 pixels, width 30 pixels. For the eyeball, we want to limit the size of that too, but let's have the parent, the button, determine the size. So on our button tag, I'm going to give this a class name of toggle. And within our styles, we can say height is 50 pixels, width is 50 pixels, and then we can target our eyeball. We want it to have a height of 100% and width of 100%, so it fills the button. Let's change the color of the lock. And remember, we can do that with the fill attribute in our CSS. So I'm going to say fill, and we'll use that dark purple color. And let's also add a margin right of 15 pixels to give it some spacing between the lock and the input field. Okay, so if we give that a save and look at the browser, it's starting to come together. Okay, for the input, let's add a class name of password. And I'm adding this to both the text and the password field. So this will make it easier to style. Okay, within our CSS, we can say password. Let's make the input a little bit bigger with height 50 pixels, width 300 pixels, and give it some padding on the left and the right. So we'll say 0 for the top and the bottom, and then 20 pixels for left and right. Let's make the text a little bit bigger. So I'll say font size 18 pixels and a font family of monospace. Okay, then let's add some margin between our input and the toggle button. So I'm going to say margin right 10 pixels. Come back over. Since we have our faux box that's supposed to look like the input field, let's make the password's background transparent and remove the default border. Based on the design that we're going for, we do want a vertical line between the lock and the area where you type. We've already turned off the default border with this border none, but we can override the left border with our border left property as long as it's below border none. So say 1 pixel solid var white. Okay, looking good. If you type within the field, you'll see the browser's default outline style. So let's turn that off. Now let's fix our button style. Let's go back to our toggle class, and we actually want to get rid of the button's background and border altogether. So say background none, border none. Let's add a cursor pointer style so that when you hover over the button, the cursor will change to a finger. And then let's also remove the outline. Since the icon is the same color as the background, you can't see it anymore. We can create a circle with a different background color for the icon to sit on. And we can do this by styling the button itself, but we want the circle to animate. So when the button is toggled, the circle expands to fill the space. We don't want a button to fill the whole space because then the entire field would be clickable. Gross. And so the easiest way to do this is to use a pseudo element after on our faux box. And then we can style it like a circle and place it directly under the icon. And then when the field is toggled, animate it to fill the space. Okay, within our CSS, let's go to our faux box styles, and just below it, add faux box after. And we need to have a content property in order to get our pseudo element to display. And I'm just gonna set the content to nothing. And I wanna set the display to block and give it a width of 55 pixels and a height of 55 pixels. And set the background color to bunting. And then to make it a circle, we need to have a border radius of 50%. And then I want to very specifically say where it's positioned. So I'm gonna use a position of absolute. And remember, positioning is always relative. We want to position it based on the parent element, our faux box. So we'll need to add a position of relative to our faux box. Okay, jumping back down, I want it to appear about 18 pixels from the right. So I'm gonna say right 18 pixels. And let's give that a save and just see what we're looking at within our browser. So it's coming together, but our circle is now appearing on top of our icon. And we can control the layering using Z index. So let's give this a Z index of 1. And then jump down to our toggle style. So down here, and add a Z index of 2. Give that a save. Now let's move on to the fun part, and probably the part that everyone has been anxious to see, the animation. Since we've been working on the circle, let's finish the animation on it. Essentially, we're animating between two different states. We have the password revealed and the password hidden. The easiest way to style these two states is to have a class on the parent element and then change the class based on the state. This isn't too hard, actually. We are already storing the state within our variable is password showing, and we've already done something similar with our input field. So we'll use the same conditional statement to display our class names. We could write this a couple of different ways, so I'll show you both options and you can decide which version you like the best. Here in password.js on our faux box, we want to update our class name. So instead of quotes, we're going to use curly brackets since this is JavaScript. And similar to our input field, we can just say is password showing. And if the value is true, then we want to display a class of show password. Otherwise, we want to show a class of hide password. And then regardless of whether we're showing or hiding our password, we want to use the class faux box. So I'll add that to both options. This works, and honestly, I think this option is the most readable, which is always something you want to consider when you're writing code. Sometimes you should be willing to sacrifice duplication and more lines of code for readability. But here there is a little bit of duplication. We added faux box twice. So let's refactor this. Let's remove the double faux box. And then we'll keep our curly brackets since, again, this is JavaScript. And at the beginning, we can use backticks to display our string faux box. Then we have our conditional. And since that's JavaScript and it needs to be processed, we can wrap that in a $ curly brackets. And then at the end, we can close our backticks and close our curly braces. Let's take a step back and look at this all together and review. We're using JavaScript, so we have our curly brackets. Then the backticks signify a string. We're displaying our faux box. And then we want to process JavaScript within our string. So we have this $ curly brackets, and we're saying if the password is showing, display show password, otherwise display hide password. This is a little bit drier. So in programming, dry stands for don't repeat yourself, but there are a few more backticks and curly brackets, which might look confusing, especially if you're just starting out. Okay, so let's look at this in the browser real quick and make sure that this is working the way that we want it to. Open our developer tools. So I'm gonna hit Command-Alt-I. That opens up our panel over here. And I'm gonna click on this arrow icon to highlight our faux box. Okay, so here's our faux box, and right now it has a class name of hide password. If we click on the eyeball, so our toggle button, this will change the class name to show password. Awesome. So within our CSS, let's style that show password state just below our after styles. Okay, we're styling our faux boxes after state when our show password class is present. And notice there's no spaces between both classes here, and that's because they're on the same element. They're on the same div. Okay, we want our circle to fill the entire space. So I'm going to say height 100%, width 100%, and we want it to be flush to the right side. I'm going to say right 0, and we want this to have the same border radius as our faux box, which is 10 pixels. Okay, so if we save this and test it within the browser, you should see it snap back and forth. And we can animate this by adding a transition property to our main default styling. So if we added it just to the animated state, it would only animate in one direction. So here, I'm gonna say transition, all the properties, and this will animate our height, width, right, and border radius properties. And I usually like to list out each property that we're animating individually since it's more performant. And when we say all, it has to watch everything, but for now I'm just gonna keep things simple and say all. Then the animation will last a quarter of a second. And the last thing we need to specify is how it will ease. And usually I'll say ease in, out, which means that it will move slower at the beginning as it's building up momentum, and then it'll slow down at the end to stop. But I want this to be a little bit more bouncy, so let's take some cues from material design, which uses cubic-bezier 0.40, 0.2, 1. Okay, I know that looks crazy, but okay, check out this website. This might make a little bit more sense. This weird looking curve is called a Bezier curve, and these weird numbers that we filled out define the points along the line. Okay, down here in the library, I'm gonna click on ease in out. Then I'm gonna click on this go button. The pink square at the top is how our cubic Bezier eases, and the bottom square is the standard ease in out. See the difference? So if you're interested, you can click and drag these handles around to compare different curve options, and it gives you these points here at the top. Okay, let's get back to our code. I don't want to have to type in these crazy numbers every single time we want to animate something, but I do want them all to ease the same way so it looks consistent. So let's move this into a variable. I'm gonna copy this, and at the top of our file, I'm gonna say easing and paste in the cubic Bezier. Then I'm going to scroll back down and replace our value with our variable. Okay, let's test this within the browser. Perfect. Okay, you may have noticed that when it's expanded, you can't click on the input to enter the password. That's because of layering. So this is sitting on top of our input. I'm going to go back to our app.css and find our password class. And our after pseudo element has a z index of 1. So it just needs to be any number above 1. So let's say index of 3. Let's hop back over to the browser, and you'll notice that our border on our input reappeared. And we can type, but the text is black and it's hard to read. So let's change the color. In our CSS below our password focus class, let's add show password, color var white. Okay, great. Now let's change the color of our lock. So right after our lock definition, let's say show password, lock, fill. We want that robin egg blue. And let's give this a z index of 4 to make sure that it shows up on top. Okay, let's test this within our browser. Perfect. Okay, the last step, we just need to animate our eyeball. We did the heavy lifting at the beginning to get everything set up, so this should be surprisingly simple. Let's do this first within the Chrome developer tools, and then we'll copy our styles over to our CSS. Okay, I'm gonna use the arrow tool to select our eyeball.svg, and then let's expand this to find our G tag. With our G tag selected, we can flip it vertically. So over here in our styles, I can say transform. Scale Y is -1. Okay, not exactly what you were expecting, and this might make a little bit more sense if I explain this within Figma. Here we have our lashes and our upper lid, and they're grouped together just like they are within our code. If I try to scale these down on the y-axis, you'll see that it flips. It doesn't look exactly like it does within our browser, but it's close. Actually, it probably looks more like this, with the top part getting cut off. You can kind of imagine the rest of the eyelid is up here. Okay. Want the point that it revolves around to be the center of the eyeball itself. We need to move that point with a CSS property called transform origin. We'll need to tweak this in the code, but let's get a good starting point. Within Figma, I'm going to hit the A key to draw a frame around our eyeball. Then I'm going to pull down my rulers. So I just hit Shift R to show the rulers. I want these to be right about here. If I hover over one of these rulers, it will tell me the values that I want. So right now I'm looking at 80 pixels and 65 pixels. So within Chrome, I'm going to say transform origin 6580. That looks pretty good. If we wanted to dial this in or double check it, you can move your cursor within the Y value and then use the up and down arrows just to make sure. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna go with 78. Okay, the middle lash is getting cut off slightly, but I can go to the SVG, and this is controlling the size. I'm going to add overflow visible. Okay, great. Now we have our values, so let's copy and paste these into VS Code. If I come back here, give that a copy, and then on our eyeball class, we want to say overflow is visible. And we want to create a new class called eyelid and paste those values from Chrome. Now we want the eyelid to be closed when we have our show password class. So let's add that before eyelid. And then to animate it, it works just like our box. And say transition, and we want to animate the transform property at 1/4 of a second and use our easing variable. Then let's actually move our transform origin property up to our main eyelid class because that's not going to change. We're not animating that. Okay, so within our browser, let's give this a refresh. It is coming along. Okay, now for our pupil. We could just animate the opacity and call it a day. After all, it's a fast animation and no one would be the wiser. But I'm a firm believer that it's the tiny things and the attention to detail that make all the difference. Plus, this is a good excuse to learn something new. So when you think about this, the upper eyelid closes down on the pupil. It doesn't just disappear. We can achieve a similar effect in CSS with clip path. And if you've ever done work in Photoshop or Figma or Sketch or XD, you're probably familiar with masks. So this is similar. I'm actually going to jump over to Firefox, and I have the Firefox Developer Edition installed on my computer. I'll include a link in the description below. I do most of my development work within Chrome, but there are a few areas where Firefox wears it better, and clip path is one of those. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So I'm going to hit Command plus a couple times, and then let's open our developer tools. I'm going to hit Command Alt I, and let's scroll over. And this part works just like Chrome. I'm going to click on our arrow icon to select our eyelid. So let's dig down into that. And let's make sure this panel is over. Now you'll notice here there's an animations tab, and right now it says no animations were found. But if you'll see we have this selected, if I click on our eyelid, it will animate and it will show us the animation curve. Now we can click and drag on the playhead to move it around and look at any part of our animation, which is pretty cool. And you'll see that at halfway, it's basically a flat line at that halfway mark. So this should give you a general idea of the shape that we're gonna work with. This isn't gonna be 100% perfect, but this will look a lot better than just changing the pupil's opacity. Okay, now we're gonna create a clip path on the pupil, and we're gonna write the code within the developer tools and then copy and paste it into VS Code. First, let's select our pupil. So it's right here. We have our class of pupil. And then on the element, down here in our CSS, I'm going to add a clip path property. And this value can be a circle, it can be an ellipse, it can be a polygon. And really I want a flat circle, so an ellipse is perfect for this, which kind of mimics the shape of the eyelid in general. Okay, so we'll say ellipse, and then inside parentheses, it takes several values. So we want the size of the width and the height of our ellipse. So I'm just gonna make something up for now, and we can dial those numbers in later. So I'm gonna say 30 pixels and 20 pixels okay, and the next two numbers are similar to our origin point. Where do we want this to be? So for now, I'm just gonna say 0, 0. Okay, now this is the crazy part with Firefox developer tools. I can click on this shape after clip path, and this shows you exactly what the clip path looks like. Then I can click and drag on these points to adjust them and dial in those numbers. And I can move this around, and you can kind of see how we want to animate it. Okay, if you're wondering why this isn't completely centered, it's because we resize the icon within our CSS. Remember, the eyeball was a lot bigger, and so if we hadn't changed the size, then our clip path would be lined up exactly. Okay, so let's do this. Let's grab the code when the ellipse is at this top point, where our pupil is completely showing, and this will be our default state. So I'm gonna copy this and go back over to VS Code, and let's create a class called pupil, and we'll add our clip path. Then let's create one for the bottom, probably right about here. Give that a copy. This is for the show password state. Okay, now we can use our transition property just like before to animate between the two states. Let's say clip path, 1/4 of a second. Then to take this just one more step, I'm gonna move the pupil down just a little bit in our show password state. So I'm gonna say transform, translate Y. We'll move it down 5 pixels. And we want to animate this, so let's add it to our default state. So I'm gonna say transform, translate Y 0, and we'll add it to our transition. Now, if we refresh, and of course you can always come back in and tweak these as much as you like and slow down the animation and examine it. One thing I do want to point out is that if you select the pupil and then you click on this toggle button to load the animation in, it will only show the pupil animation. Same with eyelid. If I click on this and then click on the toggle, it will only show the eyelid animation. And if you drag this around, you'll notice that the pupil doesn't animate. If you want to see both animations loaded in, grab the parent state. And now when you click on the toggle button, it'll load everything in. In the browser, I'm gonna hit Command 0 to zoom out to 100%, and you can see the entire animation. Awesome. Done. I know this is a long one, but I'm pretty pleased with the end result. I've posted all my code on GitHub, link in the description below. Feel free to download it, use it, modify it, whatever, it's yours. If you like this video and want to see more videos on web design and development, be sure to hit the subscribe button below, hit the bell icon to receive notifications when new videos are posted. Until then, keep coding. Okay, did it.